Hey guys, this is Brian. Today we're going to take a quick look at the Gigabyte X99 UD4 motherboard from Gigabyte. This is an Intel X99 chipset-based motherboard. It's part of the new generation Haswell-E processors. I'm just going to look in the box real quick and show you the board itself. It comes in this presentation box, which I usually see with higher end motherboards and things like that. This is a little bit higher end, and probably mostly for the fact right now that there are just simply not a lot of X99 motherboards out there. I'm sure that there's going to be more, however, as the market increases here. So this is the board itself, and we'll just go over real quickly the accessories that come in the box. As with pretty much all Gigabyte motherboards, you get an amazing slew of connectors for SLI and Crossfire. I mean, literally just like every single one ever. So if you need those, that's great. If you're like me, you end up recycling them because I just don't have a reason for them. You get your SATA cables and some extra PCIe connector cables and your backing plate. Now, the interesting thing on the backing plate for this motherboard is that it's got LED lights built into it. They're literally built around it. You can see there's a little power cable right here, and so that's kind of interesting because, well, it's going to light the whole thing up. I don't know, it's going to look cool, I guess. You know, I'll see after I've built with it a little bit, but that's just something that I did think was kind of an interesting thing from Gigabyte. I don't usually see that kind of specialty stuff as much with Gigabyte. And then you get the incredibly useless multilingual installation guidebook, which you're going to recycle. I don't understand why Gigabyte keeps including that. And then you get, of course, your instruction manual and your driver disk. All right, so let's talk about the motherboard a little bit, and just some of the features on it and things along those lines. So it's got a look very much like many of the Gigabyte boards that we've seen before, but there are some things that are obviously a little bit different. First of all, of course, this is socket 2011-3, so if you are looking to build Haswell-E, this is, of course, going to be the only way you're going to go. The socket is a little bit different, and that's because 2011-3 is, of course, a little bit different on its overall pinout design. And so the flip-out arms here to access the socket are a little different from what I usually see on Gigabytes. They're at an angle. Doesn't really change anything from what I know, but anyway. You've got your north and your south bridge heat sinks, and they are connected by a heat pipe, which I do find kind of interesting because I haven't been seeing that on Gigabyte boards. So they're connected by a heat pipe. You've got 8 RAM slots. This is DDR4, of course, on the new Haswell-E platform. And so you're not going to use DDR3. Obviously, this is a different pinout. Just something to keep in mind. The board is capable at this time of up to 64 gigs of RAM. I believe that there's the possibility that this could support more, however, with future updates, firmware updates, things like that. Gigabyte's pretty well known for improving the firmware of their motherboards so that you can do other things with them usually. And beyond that, it does have, this one does have, I believe, some built-in Wi-Fi. There's 2 connectors here, antenna. It's an antenna bracket. I don't really care about that too much. Sometimes that stuff causes issues for audio and video production, but you might. It's kind of a cool little option otherwise. And connector-wise, slot-wise, you're going to notice there are no PCI slots on here, no legacy PCI. So it's finally been pretty much pushed out. So if you use a legacy PCI device, unfortunately, it's going to have to go to the curb at this point. Now you do get a lot of PCIEs, obviously. So, you know, there is plenty of expansion here. You've got lots of, you know, the standard smaller PCIEs, and then your standard PCIe slots. So you've got a lot to work with if you need to, but no PCI. That is finally gone. And we'll just look at connectors for hard drives real quick. There's standard SATA connectors, as you can see, and also SATA Express connectors. So you do have an option to connect, you know, multiple types of hard drives. Now, another interesting thing to note is that the heat sinks actually have LEDs around them as well. And you can see there's a little power connector right here, and it runs over to just around your heatsink. So there's LED around it. So, you know, kind of just a focus, I guess, on making it look cooler with this board. But I don't know, that doesn't really matter to me too much. But lots of I/O on this board as well, which is nice. You've got, obviously, a slew of USB 3, 5 USB 3s, you've got your Gigabit, and then you've got your USB 2s, and good old Gigabyte, they still hang on to the old school mouse and keyboard connectors. It's interesting. I find it very interesting that they keep hanging on, but they keep hanging on, so bless them for it, I guess. You're also going to find here a Q-Flash Plus USB port. That's something that's specific to Gigabyte, but as far as I know, it'll still work as a standard USB port. And then you've got your audio outputs. If you're like me, you're going to bypass that stuff pretty quickly with a real audio device. So, overall, you know, the board has pretty much about the same amount of connectivity that I've seen with the X79 boards that came on the previous generation for these size processors, but obviously with some noted improvements. X99, DDR4 RAM, and, you know, some other little things that are coming new from Gigabyte. Another thing to note here is that on the RAM slots, and it's not a big deal, but on the RAM slots, they're a little more like the ASRock RAM slots now, I'm noticing, where there's not clips on both sides. There's only clips on one side. These are not clips. It's not a big deal, but you do need to be mindful of that sometimes because it can make inserting RAM a little harder. There are a lot of fan connectors on this board, which is nice. You've got your standard CPU fan and then your option fan, which is for water cooling. And then you've got another fan connector down here, and then you've got a system fan connector down here on the headers, on the header connectors, which actually we should talk about real quick. You've got your standard Gigabyte header. It's a little wider than most other manufacturers, but you got your Gigabyte right there. And then a front USB 3 connector, just one of them, your standard USB 2 connectors, and then you're going to find that you've got, there's an ATX 4-pin connector here for supplying 4-pin ATX power to the board, and SPDIF and front panel audio, and etc., etc. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything that you're going to find on this board. You know, as I say, X99 is still new, so there's still some new stuff coming out. So you might see some improvements as new firmware comes out for this board. But in the meantime, you know, I just thought I'd give you guys a look at what it is that you got here. Oh, and there's one more thing that I should mention, and this is kind of interesting. Gigabyte apparently has extended the amount of space that is around the screw connectors for mounting, the mounting holes for mounting the board into your case. So you notice that there's no soldering on the PCB around that hole. So I guess a lot of people had complained to them that they had driven a screwdriver or something through some solder points. I don't know, but Gigabyte made a big deal about it. So I figured that I would mention it. So anyway, that right there is the new X99 UD4 motherboard from Gigabyte, and I hope that you guys found it useful. If you've got questions or comments, if there's anything that I can help you out to learn about this board, feel free to be in touch. I always am a fan of Gigabyte motherboards, been using them for quite a long time. I use them in my own systems. Always been very happy with them. Don't think I'm going to be having any issues really with this new X99 series here, with the exception of there's probably going to be more firmware updates for the next year or so than what you might be used to. But beyond that, I don't see having any issues with Gigabyte. So, hope you guys found it useful, and as always, feel free to be in touch if you've got questions or comments. And until next time, take care.